Welcome to the Gonzo Chronicles. I'm your host, Cyrus Alderwood, the official spokesman for Generation X. Stick around. It's going to get weird, as always. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Gonzo Chronicles. This is Cyrus, your usual host of this crazy effed up show. Hey, today is June 20th. Happy belated birthday to yours truly. So I consider it my birthday month, everybody. So go celebrate. You have permission to go have some drinks on me. I'm not paying for them. Just go have them. When you think of me, think nicely. Hey, so a while back, uh, did a show on here with a co-host, Elizabeth Cooper from the Caffeinated Cooper Show, and we talked about a place called the Murder Castle. And this was the story of H. Holmes, which was considered America's first serial killer. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the show, go back in the archives and listen to this, because this guy was absolutely disturbing, to say the least. There's a book that was written about him called Devil in the White City that took place in Chicago during the World's Fair of the late 1800s. So this guy actually had a building built that had all the entrapments there to murder people, throw them down what they call the murder chute, down into the basement where he would incinerate them. He actually had an underground tunnel going across the street, underneath the street. So some wild stuff. And so recently, what the reason I bring this up is recently I was watching, I don't know, it might have been the History Channel or the Travel Channel or maybe one of those history or crime channels on Pluto, whatever it was. I saw this. It was a documentary on Jack the Ripper, and this is such an infamous story, and like this goes back, for a long way. So I guess they were trying to draw a connection between Jack the Ripper and H. Holmes. Is it the same guy? Okay, so I decided I would do some reading and I finished watching that show, but I thought this might be something interesting to talk about on this episode because in the next episode, we're going to talk about something creepy and crazy, like a recent unsolved mystery that just will blow your mind. And Elizabeth will be back to talk about that on the next episode. Um, but, the Jack the Ripper murders, everyone knows about this. So I'll not get into too much detail, but uh, this is like these murders, I guess, cemented this guy in the annals of history as one of the greatest whodunit murder mystery cases in the entire world. To this day, it's unsolved. The murders occurred in 1888. Back then, you didn't have the same police techniques that were used today, or if they did have them, they were sort of, and they're the baby steps of those, the intimacy, I guess, the intimacy, Freudian slip, infancy, and I guess I didn't really have a lot of forensic knowledge um, at all. Uh, there was no signed confession, no official arrest, no proof that the Ripper who he was. So it's basically been unknown for since 1888, right? What are we looking at? 130 years roughly. So this guy today, I guess, if you're a person who watches a lot of mysteries and unsolved mystery shows, this guy's like the father of modern day serial killers. So it's the first recorded case of a serial killer in the UK. And at that time, you can imagine the hysteria that it caused the public and just people terrified. Um, and this was like written in the newspapers every day. I refer to this stuff as fear porn. You can imagine just how bad it got. The entire city of London was under this dude's shadow and under his spell. And, that legacy of the Jack the Ripper murders, I guess, still linger today, especially around the area of what they call Whitechapel. It's where the murders took place. But, can you profile the man Jack the Ripper? I guess back then they didn't really have profilers, but, over the last 100 years or so, people have been studying this. And, excuse me there, I had to pause because I had to sneeze. Um, so I guess it's possible now that people could build some sort of profile of Jack the Ripper. What kind of man was he? What drove this savage to do these horrible things and mutilations to these women? So anyway, I guess using more modern profiling techniques, people set out to kind of profile this guy. So I was digging around on the internet. Some of the things I found that I jotted some notes down here, just of what like random people I guess I had profiled had thought. One was that Jack the Ripper didn't kill for the purpose of torture, not for financial gain, not for money. Um, the way that he killed, uh, the method they said suggests that he killed quickly, right, which he did, and that the mutilation of the body was probably the driving force behind the murder because he killed him quickly and then took his time mutilating. Uh, they said that one of the profilers had said that he wasn't sadistic in the sense that the infliction of pain was giving him pleasure, but he would strangle his victims until they're unconscious, and then when they lay on the ground, he started performing this ritual mutilation on them, removing their nipples, removing breasts, just terrible, terrible stuff. So, according to profilers, this suggests that the killer wants to dominate his victims um, with overwhelming power and sexual violence, the way he mutilated them. So they say it showed a deep resentment towards his victim, where he has to destroy who they are. And in 1888, um, no one really had seen anything like this. The police would not have ever encountered anything like this. There was a book that came out called Hunting Human by a guy named Elliot Layton. And it shows how serial killers appeal to appear to be like a social phenomenon. And it was apparently it was rare until about 1950, uh, with maybe like one serial killer popping up every decade. In the 1960s, here we identified 6 serial killers. In the 70s, that figure jumped to just under 20. In the 80s, it had shown a new serial killer every month in the United States alone. So, since the 80s, I guess the study and research of serial killers has shown that certain patterns of behavior are recurrent and they seem common to a certain percentage. So, it's been learned that people generally operate in an area that they know well. They operate in a place where they feel safe. So it's likely that these people were saying that they were writing that Jack the Ripper probably lived in Whitechapel and lived among the victims. Uh, there was a piece of one of his victims, Catherine Eddowes' apron, that was dropped on Goulston Street. They said that was a really important clue, that he carried that and he must have been around, lived around that area. Um, he was probably respectable in appearance and probably a charming type of guy, like a lot of other serial killers, like Ted Bundy, for example. Um, they were, able to strike up conversations with their victims, put them at ease, put them off guard, that sort of thing. So, according to this, serial killers are able to connect with people's emotions using the victim's personality against them. They focus on a person's weakness and vulnerability, convincing them to do things that they would otherwise avoid. They become persuasive and charming, carefully dismantling their intended victim's cautious instincts, as I read. So again, I mentioned Ted Bundy. He used that trick. He used that trick in court. He charmed everyone. He actually walked around with a sling, his arm in a sling, to I guess so people would think he had a broken arm, and would convince women to help him pick up heavy objects into the back of his car or whatever. Um, Other times, I think he dressed up as a cop at one point to gain trust. He was actually executed in 1989. He confessed to over 30 murders. Um, and experts that studied him, talked to him, they all said it was his good looks and his mild manners, charming manners, that really led to his ability to even capture all the victims he did. So during the Jack the Ripper murders, I guess women would be wary of who they approached because everyone was on guard, or they'd be really cautious about who they're left alone with, no matter how much they needed to earn money or whatever. So the fear factor was already there in Whitechapel and around London. So these prostitutes are on guard. So how did he still manage to get that close to getting them alone and killing them? So it had to be through charm and a respectable appearance. He had to be somebody that could put him off guard. Um, Maybe he himself dressed up as a cop. I don't know. I mean, it's the mystery still out there. So um, I guess a lot of people would say that I guess maybe had issues with psychologically, maybe hated his mother. Maybe his mother was somebody that was incredibly controlling and domineering. Um, Maybe mentally tortured the poor guy. Yeah, the dude maybe physically or sexually assaulted him when he was young. As he grew older, I guess his mother would come to represent all women, perhaps, and that he despised them all. It's possible maybe she was even a prostitute. There's so many possibilities when these profilers were, reviewing all the case history of Jack the Ripper that this came up. Anyway, by the late '80s, uh, I think it was 1988, I read that the first ever profile of Jack the Ripper was done by an FBI profiler by the name of John Douglas and another guy by the name of Roy Hazelwood, also an FBI profiler. So they took the original police reports, medical evidence, and they come up with a list of characteristics that Jack the Ripper would have. Now, I'm going to read all 11 of these, and you can find this on a Jack the Ripper page. This is where I found it online. Just if you just do a Google search, I forgot the page, but Ripper would be a white male, probably between 25 and 35 years old, probably lived local to Whitechapel or what they called the Spitalfields area. He was probably a loner who was more likely unmarried. Uh, he probably would have not had a father figure as a young child. Very dominant mother figure, like I mentioned. Probably had a mental or physical disability or deformity, which made him feel different from others, or made him feel lesser than others. A solitary job, which kept him away from social encounters. Seen as quiet and timid to those who knew him, he would be perceived as a little odd. Beneath the surface, again, is a deep, resentful aggression, which explodes during bouts of low self esteem. And the last trait that here, he would not feel guilt or remorse for his crimes, and in a way consider them justified. There's something that was written by this special agent Douglas. I'm going to read this. We would look for someone below or above average in height and or weight. May have problems with speech, a scarred complexion, physical illness, or injury. We would not expect this type of offender to be married. If he was married in the past, it would have been to someone older than himself, and the marriage would have been for a short duration. He is not adept in meeting people socially, and the major extent of his heterosexual relationships would be with prostitutes. The offender does not look out for the ordinary, or does not look out of the ordinary. However, the clothing he wears at the time of the assaults is not his everyday dress. He wants to project to unsuspecting female prostitutes that he has money. He comes from a family where he was raised by a domineering mother and a weak, passive father. In all likelihood, his mother drank heavily and enjoyed the company of many men. As a result, he failed to receive consistent care and contact with stable adult role models. This could have resulted in the would be serial killer having an introverted nature, lashing out violently as a result of his frustration. And there's more to this. In all probability, Jack the Ripper was like one of these people, ordinary, but only on the surface. So this was really, really interesting stuff. Now Jack the Ripper had several different victims, and if you go to the case book, let me just go over real quickly the victims that this guy had. There was Martha was it Tabram? I think maybe we had a show on this a while back too. Uh, she was not one of the five, right? Martha Tabram was considered to be connected with the Jack the Ripper murders for a long time due to her identity and the nature of her murder. Found in August of '88 on a landing in George Yard. Martha Tabram had 39 separate stab wounds inflicted with two different weapons. Um, she was unlikely to be a later discovery in the mid 20th century resulted in a general consensus that she was unlikely to be the first Jack the Ripper victim. There was Emma Smith, who was the earliest recorded victim in the Whitechapel murders. She died in April 1888 in a London hospital. She lived on George Street, which is the Spitalfields area, and was generally known to be a prostitute, though there was much mystery surrounding her life. Right, so she died, the rupturing and inflammation of the tissue inside her abdomen. Her death was caused by the attack of Jack the Ripper on the evening of Easter Monday on April 2nd, which kicked off the Whitechapel murders that spanned from 1888 to 1891. There was also Mary Ann Nichols. Upon investigation, her throat had been cut multiple times to the spine, one having penetrated the spine, along with brutal, savage abdominal injuries. Her death caused much speculation in the media, and she would later be known as the first of the canonical five Jack the Ripper victims. There was Annie Chapman, who was a 47-year-old woman living on Hanbury Street. She was also um, she worked in the flower crocheting and tried to make ends meet, resorting to prostitution when times are hard. She was found dead on the stone steps leading from the back door of her three-story Hanbury Street home. She was discovered by another resident at about 6 a.m. Again, throat cut, body mutilated. Um, and that was, again, sent the area into panic. There was Elizabeth Stride. She was a Swedish native with a history of prostitution before she moved to London, using the inheritance money from her mother's death. She lived a pretty good life in London before things fell apart in her marriage, and she resorted to prostitution again, which is likely what was going on the night of her death, which was September 29th, 1888. She was found dead next to a Jewish anarchist club with a slit throat. Again, another slit throat. No other mutilations, though, which made some people doubt Jack the Ripper's involvement. However, the freshness of the corpse led many to believe that the Ripper had simply been interrupted before finishing his work. Catherine Eddowes was a 46-year-old victim with a difficult marriage in her past. Again, fell apart, led to drinking problems, and of course, her husband had violent tendencies. Her ex-husband. Eddowes died in the early hours of September 30th of 1888 in a quiet corner in Mitre Square, or Mitre Square. Is that however you pronounce that? Reports from locals said that tracked her movements quite accurately with reports of her taking a man only 10 minutes before she was found dead. Again, body viciously mutilated. And that's when people began to think that Jack the Ripper had surgical experience because he had removed organs from her body. Mary Jane Kelly was considered to be Jack the Ripper's final victim. She had a mysterious past, and at the age of 25 was the youngest of the Ripper's victims. Kelly's death was particularly violent. Her body was found inside her home in Miller's Court, mutilated beyond recognition, with multiple body parts removed and placed around the room. Her death caused an uproar in the community, with crowds forming at her funeral, and she is by far the most famous of the Ripper's victims, as well as the one that was most investigated throughout the years. There was Annie Farmer. Um, a lot of people think that she was attacked by Jack the Ripper. She was This was not even 48 hours after Mary Jane Kelly's brutal murder. Annie Farmer is a 40-year-old divorcee who had taken to a life of prostitution to make ends meet. Her wound was stitched, and she actually survived this. Um, upon meeting a man and taking him to the lodging house in George Street, the man was seen running out of the building, and Annie Farmer followed, claiming he had attacked her. Her wound was stitched. She was taken to the hospital, and the media again went into a frenzy. Rose Milett, Catherine Rose Milett, was 29 at the time of her death. She was nicknamed Drunk Lizzie Davis due to her infamous drinking habits. She was killed in December 1888. She was last seen drunk with two men before being found in Clark's yard at 4:15 a.m. Um, Her death and the inquest around it didn't suggest that she was murdered by Jack the Ripper, but it did demonstrate the poor communication with the police force. Um, and so that actually, which was a common issue around there, they didn't really communicate very well with each other. There was another victim, Clay Pipe Alice McKenzie. She's called Clay Pipe because of her smoking habit. She was 40 years old, and she died in July of 1889. Her body was found by a police officer with her neck cut and different stab wounds across the body, all of which were considered similar to Jack the Ripper of the previous year. Mackenzie was also an occasional prostitute, which matched the profile of the other victims, though there was still some conflict in the police whether this was a Ripper um, killing or not. Frances Coles was a 32-year-old prostitute, found all but dead underneath a railway arch in Swallow Garden near Chambers Street. She died on the way to the hospital from a slit throat, um, but no one really was able to determine if her death was because of the Ripper or not. Um, Her significant other at the time, who was a sailor named James Sadler, he was suspected and was charged, but later acquitted. This was actually the final murder of the Whitechapel murders, so not all of them could have been pinned on Jack the Ripper. Now keep the time frame in mind. So Jack the Ripper was one of the most famous serial killers, like I said, between 1888 and 1889. His butchering suddenly ceased, and a new Chicago-based serial killer, H. Holmes, was discovered at the height of the Chicago's World Fair in 1893. So is H. Holmes actually Jack the Ripper? Jack the Ripper is known for murdering prostitutes on the streets of London. There was another copycat killer later on called the Yorkshire Ripper, but his violence towards sex workers was not uncommon in the late 1800s anyway. Even though prostitution was legal at the time, the one thing that made Jack the Ripper stand out um, was the way he did it. So H. Holmes, on the other hand, is considered America's first serial killer, like I mentioned. In the book The Devil in the White City, if you want to go pick this book up, it's actually a really interesting book. It's written by a guy, by Eric Larson is his name. I think I still have that on my Kindle. Um, he was tried and hanged, H. Holmes was, for 27 murders. Although some believe that this guy murdered over 200 people. So anyway, Early in his career, Holmes charmed his way into owning a pharmacy. It's believed he attended medical school. It's also believed that he, like Jack the Ripper, used some medical methods to mutilate and dispose of his victims' bodies. He actually often, this is the weirdest thing. This guy donated, H.H. Holmes, if you go back and listen to that previous episode of the Gonzo Chronicles, he donated tons of human skeletons to medical schools. And I don't know why anyone didn't find it weird that how in the hell did he come up with so many just random skeletons to donate to medical schools? So I got to tell you, man, we think we live in weird times now. I don't think I'd want to be in Chicago in the 1890s. Anyway, the travel documentation and witness accounts also lend themselves to the theory that Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes are the same person. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but there's some circumstantial evidence to show this. The biggest issue with Holmes and Ripper being the same crazy bastard is that one was in Chicago, the other in London at a time when international travel was not real easy. If you wanted to travel back and forth across the pond, you had to go by boat, which took about a month. It's a long time. However, the Ripper killings ended in 1889, and the first Holmes killing at the end of 1889. So the Ripper ended early 89. H.H. Holmes began in late 1889. So the timeline's possible. Not only that, but it's recorded that a passenger by the name of H. Holmes traveled from the UK to the US in that same time period. Now, I guess that's a pretty popular name back then, or even now, but H. Holmes, his legal name was actually Herman Webster Mudgett. But is it possible? Maybe. In addition, there are accounts that descriptions of the Ripper. The multiple sketch artists were able to come up with drawings of Jack the Ripper, which, oddly enough, look very similar to H. Holmes. However, another account describes the Ripper of having brown eyes and brown hair, um, which could, mean anything, I guess. But even though Jack the Ripper was in London, it's possible he was an American. All right, so there was a letter that was published in the media then called the Dear Boss letter, and you can Google this. It's believed to have been sent by Jack the Ripper himself. So when linguists examined the letter, they believe that whoever wrote the letter was American. While that may be the case, I don't know. There's no way to actually confirm the letter was actually sent by Jack the Ripper. So there's again, circumstantial at best. The main reason experts will say that H. Holmes will deny that they're the same person is that they had different motives. Right? So Jack the Ripper went after poor women who were sex workers. H. Holmes typically was after money. So he was adept at moving accounts and signing life insurance over to different aliases he had. If you go back and listen to the show, you'll hear all this stuff. He'd try to find people disconnected to family or murder entire families and siblings to take their inheritance. This guy was nuts. But while many experts believe those differ too much for them to be the same person, someone who murdered as many people as Holmes did probably enjoyed killing just as much as Jack the Ripper, if not more. So is it plausible they could still be the same guy? Yeah, in that regard, yes. Not only that, but Jack the Ripper's final murder was different from his previous ones, and that it seemed a lot more premeditated. The others maybe just were randomly thought about doing it, goes out and does it, and then maybe the last one was a lot more premeditated plan. So it's possible he sort of evolved. Um, Jack the Ripper was never caught, so that's another reason people think there's a link between Jack the Ripper and H. Holmes, is because the guy was never caught in London. However, the evidence linking the two murders to the two guys together um, is, like I said, circumstantial at best, and many think it's actually impossible that they're the same person. But in 2019, a report published DNA evidence claiming Jack the Ripper was 23-year-old Aaron Kaminsky, a Polish barber. He was actually a suspect during the murders actually during that time due to a witness identifying him. However, the witness refused to testify, and Kaminsky was just dropped. Like, he wasn't captured or somebody pressed him on the kill. He later died of gangrene in an institution in 1919. Although the DNA evidence points to Kaminsky as the Ripper, there's no confirmation that the scarf that tested the fluid, the seminal fluid, actually belonged to the Ripper's victim. So it seems like the mystery of Jack the Ripper is always going to have crazy lore around it. Now, here's where it actually gets a little bit more interesting. Um, like I said, there's a string of all these different similarities, and there was actually a case book I actually pulled up. If I can find it, there was a guy who claimed he's actually a relative of H.H. Holmes. And yeah, here it is. Jeff Mudgett, who's a lawyer, happens to be the great great grandson of H.H. Holmes. This is the guy I saw in a documentary. He claims that Holmes and Jack the Ripper are the same guy, which is, again, this theory has been discussed by historians and I guess what they call ripperologists, right? It's a term I read online. I thought that was quite interesting. Anyway, according to Mudgett, Scotland Yard detectives visited the United States in search of the Ripper because they became suspicious and thought that he might be hiding out over in America. So Mudgett, his great great grandson, also believes that Holmes was the mysterious man behind the Whitechapel murders, masquerading as Jack the Ripper as an alias to carry out these crazy crimes, just this sadistic inner nature, this monster that's trying to come out of this guy. He believes that Jack the Ripper carried out these 5 murders, killing 5 prostitutes in the East End of London before escaping to the U.S. to dodge the British police who were on the lookout for him. He went on to say that he thought the investigation was aborted halfway, which helped Holmes get back to business once again in Chicago. So, to support this claim, he submitted samples of handwritten text from H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper for review. Experts reviewed the handwriting and they confirmed that it is likely possible, it's a possibility, it's a very likely possibility that the 2 samples could have been written by the same hand. So we're going to have questions about who Jack the Ripper was from now until end of time, probably. But the interesting thing was on this documentary, if you happen to find this on TV with Mudgett in there, he went to the site where the murder castle was built, and of course it's torn down. They're not going to leave some site like that up. Here's the weird thing though, like there's an area of land, if they could get permission to excavate it, where they might find people buried that he killed, because right there is and on that site is a post office. Creepy stuff. Anyway, what do you think? Jack the Ripper, H.H. Holmes, America's first, serial killer, so to speak. Are they the same guy? It's very likely possible. So, if you get an opportunity, like I said, go check out that book, go find that documentary, and what do you think? What do you think about this mystery? Yeah, if you have any thoughts on it, email me, cyrus.alderwood@gmail.com. Let me know what you think. Appreciate everybody listening here today. So, on the next episode, Elizabeth Cooper will be back with us. Like I said, we're going to be talking about another unsolved sort of mystery that I just cannot wrap my mind around why someone would do something this insane. Yeah, it's a little teaser. Hey, if you get an opportunity, go check out my Substack, cyrusalderwood.substack.com. Subscribe, it's free. You can be one of the paid subscribers and get some of the things that I don't make available to anybody but paid subscribers. Some of my writings that I may be doing right now. Actually, some really interesting stuff, short stories on there that I started with other writers on a weekly writing prompt. So Go check it out. I think you'll like what you see there. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on this and check us out on Cyrus Alderwood over on YouTube, Twitter, and I will see you on down the road.